Hey, let's learn how to thread our needle and knot our thread for hand sewing. Grab your needle and thread and let's practice together. You will need your thread, your needle, beeswax if you are using linen thread, a really nice small sharp pair of scissors like embroidery scissors, think of those like little stork scissors, really good light, and eye magnification if you need it. I'm going to thread this lightweight linen, which is Londonderry linen thread, and it is 100/3. So it's a pretty fine linen thread. The higher the number, the finer the thread, and then 3 indicates the ply or how many yarns are twisted together in order to make the final thread. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that our thread and our needle are complementary. So the girth of our needle is going to be a little bit bigger than the girth of our thread. Not by a lot, but just by a little bit. This is a size 9 needle, and I pulled it from my variety pack. This particular pack is size 3 to 9, 9 being the smallest, 3 being the larger ones. They're really good for hand sewing, specifically for any kind of construction or mending. Okay, so take your spool, and we're just going to do a single strand of thread for sewing. The reason we're doing a single strand of thread is because on historically hand sewn garments, that's typically what was used. I'm gonna start by spooling off a thread that is the length of my arm. So I wanna take it and hold it in my hand, and I'm gonna draw it up to my shoulder, and then I'm going to clip it. Now pay attention to where you clip. Hold on to this side because this is where we're going to thread our needle. You want to thread the needle with the side of the thread from where you clipped on the spool. So if you run your hand over top of it, you're going to notice this feels a little bit smoother than if we run it the opposite direction. As we run our hands over our linen thread, we're going to notice that it feels a little bit textured. And also with this thread, it likely has a little bit of inconsistency in the spinning process, so there might be some thinner and thicker areas. We need to use our beeswax in order to sew with linen because otherwise it's going to shred, and we don't want that. So in order to wax our thread, we want to take our beeswax, lay our thread on top of it, hold your thumb on it, and then we're just going to gently pull this with our non-dominant hand, and it's going to glide between our fingers and the wax. And I like to do kind of like the bottom half of it, then I'll do the top half of it. So we're just going to coat it about 4 or 5 times. Then we're going to run our fingers along the thread. Some people will take their wax thread and sandwich it in between paper and iron it to do this, but the heat of your hand when you run it over top of it will actually do just fine. If you've forgotten which direction you're supposed to thread the needle, run your fingers over it. One will have more resistance and one side will feel smoother. We do have a little bit of like a thicker piece here, so I'm actually just gonna cut that off because I don't wanna deal with that because that's gonna be frustrating. So my thread is a little bit shorter, but that's okay. Now to thread our needle, we wanna pay attention to the size of the eye. So if we look really, really closely, an eye is not a circle. It is actually an oval. So that means that it's a flattened circle. Our thread is actually spun in a circle. So we want to flatten the tip of where we want to thread through our needle. So you can do that specifically when it's waxed. You can just take your dominant hand and flatten it. You can also put it in your mouth and wet it a little bit and flatten it. Now we want to hold the thread with our non-dominant hand very, very close to where we want to thread it. This is going to stabilize an otherwise very flimsy material. And then instead of pushing our thread into the eye of our needle, we are going to lay our needle on top of our thread. I call it needling the thread versus threading the needle. We're going to lay the flat portion of the needle on the flat portion of the thread, pushing together our hands to stabilize. And it'll glide on like that. Now gently make sure you kind of wiggle it through. Now grab the tail. And we want that tail to be about 1/3 of the length of the thread that we cut. Now to knot this thread, we are going to leave this shorter tail alone, but we are going to go to the end that we want the knot to be in. We're going to now bring it together towards the needle. I'm holding the needle in my dominant hand and where I want the knot to be in my non-dominant hand. I'm going to take where the knot needs to be. I'm going to lay it on my pointer finger, gently push the needle down on it with very little thread. It's not really visible. I'm going to take my non-dominant hand. I'm going to wrap. So I'm going to wrap this about 4 or 5 times. And I'm going to hold it taut with my non-dominant hand, and then I'm going to gently draw that wrapping down and pinch it with my dominant hand. Now we want to hold it nice and snug with this dominant hand and gently push that needle up, still pinching, hold this. Now we want to pinch the tail and the thread with the eye of the needle, and we're going to pull, 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 and then we're going to feel resistance where that knot is. Kind of roll it in your fingers. This is called a quilter's knot. This knot was taught to me by my 7th and 8th grade math teacher and advisor. So thank you, Mrs. Geiger, for teaching me how to do a quilter's knot. Knowing how to thread your needle and knot your thread is a basic life skill. Let me know in the comments what projects you're working on. I hope that this helped you to remember what your hands can do.